Hello guys, this is CannibalChess, and in today's video we're going to be going over the King's Pawn opening whale variation. And although I'm sure many of you all don't really know what that looks like, it has been known to be played against grandmasters by grandmasters, so it's a pretty serious opening and variation that you can get into and cause some damage with. And so a really good thing about this opening is that the opening moves are very common, so e4, e5, and then here instead of playing something like knight to f3, then you go ahead and play c4. And this is called the whale variation, I'm assuming, because after your opponent plays the next move, most of the lines that you get into will have you play, so let's say they play something like knight to c6, it'll have you play d3, and it kind of looks like a whale's tail here. And so as I said, most other common moves that you'd see besides knight c6 would be something like knight to f6, and then there you would still play d3, and the same with bishop to c5. You could also play pawn to d3, but here you have a few options for the best move. They're all kind of really good. You can play knight to c3, or you could play knight to f3. And another great thing about this opening is that after you play your third move, and your opponent, after they play their third move, so let's say they play something like knight to d4 here, then the next move for you, the best move, is going to be not a pawn move, but it's going to be a developing move with one of your minor pieces. So like knight to f3, it's a very common move to see. You're just developing one of your kingside minor pieces to f3, but it's also one of the best moves in the position. And also, if you ever see your opponent put their knight on the d4 square between your whale tail here, you always know that you are in a better position than them, because they're not supposed to already be looking to put their knight on this outpost, because you can still come up here and bring your knight to f3 and attack their knight and try and win back that outpost. So this position for you is definitely better. Same with the move bishop to c5. So if they played this move instead of going for the outpost, then you can play knight to c3 still, or you could still play knight to f3 as well. So I would just recommend playing this move because it's getting the minor pieces on the king side out faster, so you want to be able to castle sooner, and it's also making sure that the knight can't come to d4 as easily, because if I play knight to c3 here, then the knight can come to d4, and it's not so bad for black here, because the knight doesn't really have to defend the e5 pawn from the f3 knight, whereas in this situation it does. So here, if the knight tries to go to d4, then it can't, because then I just take the pawn on e5, and I'm better here by quite a bit. Now, important side note, if you ever see this position where your opponent has a knight and a bishop on the left side, and they just played knight to f6, or they already played that move and they just played bishop to c5 or knight to c6, so they have this position, and then you have a zigzag with your pawns, the whale tail, and then you have the knight on f3, and it's your turn to play, then you have to know these three moves so you don't get in trouble, okay? Because you could easily play something like knight to c3 here, just thinking, well, I need to develop my pieces, and then your opponent can play knight to g4, and they will be double attacking the weak pawn on f2. So there are three moves that you should know in this specific position to be able to counter that. And all of them are quite good options. So you can play bishop to c3 here, and now if your opponent tries to play knight to g4, you can just pick up the bishop for free here. So they can't really play knight to g4 in this position. And also, if they trade down the bishops here, then it's also better for you, because you can just take back, and now you have this really big pawn center. And so you know that this knight is probably never going to come to d4 after the f pawn moves to e3, so it can now guard this square. Another important move to note is bishop to e2, and this is also a really good option. So if your opponent tries to play knight to g4 now, then they're just kind of wasting a move, and you can just castle here, and so you are developing your rook, and they're kind of messing up their position, because now their knight is overextended, doesn't have any defense. So at some point you could probably either push h3 to push the knight back, or you could move this knight away and then be double attacking this knight. So there are a few options there as well. And then the last move to know is to just play h3. So you just prevent it altogether. So if the knight comes here now, then you just obviously take. So I would definitely consider playing bishop e2 or bishop to e3 before playing h3 for sure. just because you need to get all these minor pieces as active as possible, and pushing a pawn isn't really doing that very well. So I would most likely go with bishop to e2 just because I want to get castled as soon as possible. And after y'all both get castled, the position will probably look something like this, and your opponent may play d6 after a few moves, if they haven't already, to try and get the light squared bishop on an active square, something like maybe e6 or even g4. And here you could play something like, knight to c3, obviously, getting your knight active. You could also try and create a pin on the knight on f6 would be fine as well, or you could play a3 even and go for b4 next move. So these are all fine ideas to continue the game. Just remember the main idea is you want to get your rook behind some pawns and try and go for promotion. And that's all I have for today's video, guys. If you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing to my channel. And as always, thanks for watching my videos.